Today on NewsWatch, fighting terror in Europe. See how authorities are working to find the militants responsible for Monday's attack in Belgium. Plus, hear how Israel officials were able to create one of the world's safest airports and how their procedures can prevent terror attacks aimed at travelers. And the Little Sisters of the Poor take the fight against Obamacare's birth control mandate to the Supreme Court. We'll show you what's ahead as they battle for religious freedom. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. A massive manhunt is underway for two possible terrorist suspects who may have been involved in the Brussels attacks. Police are trying to catch them before they spread more death and destruction elsewhere in Europe. Gary Lane is on the story.
It's an all too familiar scene in Europe. Another memorial to the dead victims of terror. Last November in France and now in Belgium. More candles, more tributes, and friends and relatives still searching for the missing. One of them is Emily Eisenman's boyfriend, 21-year-old Bart Mihom.
I just really want to know if he is okay, that I'll see him again, and that his family will see him again.
Others, like this American, were relieved to learn their loved ones were okay. The Brussels airport may reopen this weekend. In the meantime, a massive manhunt is underway for at least one of the terrorists responsible for Tuesday's attack, and others who may be plotting more acts of terror. So far, police have identified the three suicide bombers and discovered that one of them, 24-year-old bomb maker Najimullah Akrawi, was also involved in the November attacks in Paris. The big question now, how many more Islamic State terrorists are out there? And was this an isolated attack or part of a much larger, wider-scale operation? The Associated Press reports European and Iraqi intelligence officials estimate at least 400 ISIS fighters have been trained to launch a deadly wave of attacks throughout Europe. Some may have entered Europe as part of last summer's massive wave of migrants from the Middle East. So what should be done now? Some say despite all the terrorist attacks in the last several years, European governments have still been too lax in recent years and need to wisen up. Members of the European Parliament are gathering for an emergency meeting to discuss anti-terrorism efforts. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is on his way to Europe. He'll spend his Good Friday in Brussels, sharing condolences from the people of the United States. And Belgians like this man fear their lives will never be the same.
I don't know how long we can take this with the military, the police. We have to go to work, we are scared. We have children, we have wives. Maybe the next day we will see them anymore.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Experts are blaming a lax security system for this week's bombing attacks in Brussels. It's a problem Israel had to overcome years ago. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
Israel's Ben Gurion Airport is considered one of the most secure in the world. That's a result of several Palestinian terror attacks on Israeli planes and passengers in the 1970s.
In Israel, we have paid a heavy price in blood, and therefore we made a decision that there's zero tolerance for terrorist attacks in our airports. So we are willing to spend the money in extra security, that the citizens themselves are willing to take the extra few minutes to be questioned and to be patient when going through these security systems.
One Swedish tourist had this to say about Israel.
I feel more secure here than in Sweden.
CBN's European reporter Dale Hurd said he calls Brussels the jihadi barracks of Europe. He wondered why an attack like this didn't happen sooner.
Security has been so lax there. It's a very easy target. I always wondered, do they really think that they're never going to be hit?
Hurd said Belgium will need help to deal with the threat.
We used to joke that if you walked through Brussels airport with a hand grenade and you dropped it, a soldier would stop you and hand it back to you, okay? Even after 9/11, I thought security was, frankly, a joke. And I'm not sure Belgium is up to the job to handle this.
Hebrew University security expert Simon Perry said Europe must make the same investment as Israel.
In Europe, apparently, the governments have not felt there was a need until now to provide such expensive security, and the citizens themselves didn't feel that there was a need. Once there will be a decision that there is zero tolerance for attacks in airports, I'm sure that the European governments will implement similar security systems in the airports in Europe.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
North Korea claims more progress in missile development. The North says it has successfully conducted a solid fuel rocket engine test. It confirmed it would boost the country's missile attacks capability against South Korea and the United States. South Korea's defense ministry says it needs to analyze the statement. In recent weeks, North Korea has launched missiles and other weapons, as well as threatened to attack South Korea. The governor of North Carolina has signed a bill to repeal the Charlotte transgender bathroom ordinance. The law clarifies bathrooms, locker rooms, and showers are limited to persons of the same biological sex. The Alliance Defending Freedom applauded the governor, Pat McCrory, calling it common sense and saying the privacy rights and safety of North Carolina citizens shouldn't be cast aside or used as a political pawn for special interest groups that desire to impose their agenda to create a genderless society. Critics say the law is an attack on transgender rights. The law also protects business owners from fines and jail time for having traditional bathrooms. The Little Sisters of the Poor and other religious nonprofits finally had their day in front of the Supreme Court fighting Obamacare's birth control mandate. The High Court will decide if the government is violating their religious liberty by mandating they provide contraceptives, which they are morally opposed to their employees. Abigail Robertson has more on this story.
Provide your employees with contraceptives on their health insurance or face millions of dollars in fines. That's the choice the federal government gave a 175-year-old Catholic nonprofit called the Little Sisters of the Poor, a small group of women who have vowed their lives to care for the elderly.
We find ourselves in this situation because the federal government has mandated that we change our health care plans to include services that are in clear violation of our Catholic faith.
The sisters were promised their religious beliefs would be protected, and then the government created a new mandate requiring them to provide contraceptives, including morning after pills like Plan B and Ella, which many Catholics view as synonymous to abortion and feel morally compelled not to fund. Lawyers for the sisters and other groups argue this case affects the religious freedoms for all Americans.
What's at stake in this case is whether or not the federal government can force the Little Sisters to violate their faith. And if they don't do it, if they don't do what the federal government wants, the federal government's going to charge them $70 million per year. But the stakes aren't just for the Little Sisters. Frankly, it's for every American. Because if the federal government can force nuns that take care of elderly poor people, if they can force them to violate their faith, then they can force any American to violate their faith.
The sisters are asking for a government exemption that 1 in 3 Americans already have. It would let them keep their existing health care plans that do not cover contraceptives. That exemption covers many big businesses, small firms, and religious employers, along with churches and synagogues, but not religious employers like faith-based schools and nonprofits. Our bodies, our lives. Supporters of the Obamacare mandate say it would be wrong for groups like the Little Sisters and others to force other people to live by their religious beliefs by denying them contraceptives.
There are many women who use this for reasons other than health reasons, and even for those who do it for birth control purposes should have access to it, and they shouldn't have to succumb to whatever the religion of their employer.
But the sisters and their supporters argue their non-Catholic employees know what they're signing up for.
We choose the places that we work in. If you don't want it, then don't work for the Little Sisters of the Poor.
The decision is expected to be released in the coming months, unless Justice Scalia's absence results in a tie 4-4 decision, which could then send the case to the lower courts. Reporting from the Supreme Court, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
A proposal to put Christ back into Christmas break for a school district in Omaha, Nebraska has been rejected. A school board member proposed changing the Miller District's winter break to Christmas break. The school board president says he appreciated the effort, but didn't believe anyone was trying to remove Christmas from the calendar. And coming up, Jews from Belgium are facing increasing dangers as radical Islam explodes in Brussels. Is it still safe for Jews to live in what used to be called the Jerusalem of the North? That's the question we explore next. What if you lived in fear you could get shot simply by going to the grocery store? That is the reality for Jews living in Belgium. We've been reporting for years that Belgium is a hotbed for radical Islam. And even before the Brussels bombings, the Jews who live in that country worried they will be the next target. As Dale Hurd reports, those fears started escalating after last year's Paris attacks.
Jews have lived in Belgium for almost 2,000 years. Antwerp has been called the Jerusalem of the North. Belgium used to be a safe place for Jews. Not so much anymore. Many of the killers in the recent Paris attacks were Belgian Muslim radicals, the kind who are violently anti-Semitic. In a series of interviews conducted before the attack, Belgian Jews told CBN News that life in Belgium was still good, but the possibility of danger was ever present.
The idyllic years are over. The tranquil years are definitely over. It can come. You can go to a grocery and all of a sudden somebody could shoot you down. You can go to a museum and the same can happen.
Professor Julien Klenner was a hidden child during the Holocaust, while half of Belgium's Jews were sent to Nazi death camps. Now he must face it all again.
How comes that the Shoah was not able to quiet down people about Jews? Why didn't that disappear into the oblivion of history, like so many other ludicrous approaches? Why is it still there? What have I done to deserve that?
At the heavily protected Jewish Takamoni school in Antwerp, director Jan Maas told us the school's history and how in World War II it was liberated by Allied troops.
So these are all American soldiers, I think, here. The U.S. Army, USA, 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 USA. We are very grateful to them.
And Maas shared how during part of the Nazi occupation of Belgium, the principal at Takamoni was an SS officer.
And I know from one of the former students, he told me, he got his Star of David here in school. He got it here in school.
Today, the school's students are threatened again by forces in Belgium that want to kill them. Michael Greenberg is the head of Jewish studies at Takamoni.
If we think that it's not enough secure to let them to go outside during the day, we keep all the students here during the day.
Most of them get over the fact that, yes, for most of the activities, you need protection. You need security.
At Beth Chabad Synagogue in Brussels, Rabbi Shimon Lasker said he personally thinks reports of anti-Semitism are overblown. Yet outside, they removed the sign for the synagogue because it kept getting vandalized.
They came in the middle of the prayers, the Jewish security, to announce that when you go home, please be careful. Don't walk too many people together. Don't try to show that Jews are walking on the street. Could you imagine? That's what we have to think about. How to walk on the street.
Today you have anti-Semitism from the left and the extreme left, anti-Semitism that is going into a form that's called anti-Zionism, and you have anti-Semitism from the Arab and Muslim communities.
Vivian Teitelbaum, a member of the Brussels Region Parliament, says the government isn't doing enough to stop it.
It's being a problem in schools, it's a problem on the streets, it's a problem with graffitis on the wall, it's a problem of security, it's a problem, it's a problem in many different aspects of our daily lives.
Europe today is not Nazi Germany, but anti-Semitism is worsening. And yet many Jews again choose to hope because they don't want to leave. But with the Muslim migrant surge from the Middle East, even more anti-Semitism is being imported into Europe. Baron Jacques Brochi is a neurosurgeon and Belgian senator.
They import the conflict of the Middle East, and due to that, the message is not a message of living together, it's not a message of love, it's a message of sometimes killing Jews.
For most Jews everywhere, whether to stay or go comes down to the welfare of their children.
And this is where I think today the Jewish community in Brussels, I'm talking about people who were born in Belgium, are starting to ask themselves, is Belgium the place for the future of their children or the future for them to continue living?
And for increasing numbers of Jews, the answer to that question is no.
Security? Look, send your kids to a Jewish school here in Brussels or even in Antwerp. What do you see? Paratroopers? Is that a normal life?
After the recent Paris attack, Zaka, the Israeli emergency response team, held drills with Belgian Jews on how to deal with terror attacks and so-called mass casualty events, a clear sign that some fear the worst.
Belgium has to start fighting so that its Jewish community can stay here, because a democracy that cannot defend its minorities is not a democracy anymore.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, in Brussels and Antwerp, Belgium.
Next, the truth about same-sex attraction. A Christian researcher looks for scientific answers. The American College of Pediatricians is calling on lawmakers and educators to reject attempts to tell children they're gender neutral. The conservative group says this new wave of gender ideology is actually abuse of children. In recent months, voices throughout our culture have stated that some people are born with biological anatomy different from their gender. But the college leaders say that's a sign of mental disorder, not a sign that the child's anatomy is wrong. The group states when an otherwise healthy biological boy believes he is a girl, or an otherwise healthy biological girl believes she is a boy, an objective psychological problem exists that lies in the mind, not the body, and it should be treated as such. We're continuing our CBN News special report, Homosexuality, a Christian View. We turn today to science. There's been a lot of research done in the field of same-sex attraction. To answer the most frequently asked questions about homosexuality, we have someone who comes from a place of science and faith.
There's plenty that we don't know, plenty that we should be open to learning, things that we should be open to researching. I don't think Christians have anything to fear from research, from science done well. I think the biggest misconception would be the idea that homosexuality is chosen. Like, I'll meet with people who've been to pastors who have told them just experiencing same-sex attraction was freely chosen, is willful disobedience, and it's not really recognizing that a young person finds themselves with these attractions and now, yes, does face choices. How will I live my life in light of what I experience? But I think to declare that the attractions themselves were a choice, I think is a mistake, and a very common one. One of the most frequently asked questions I receive is what causes homosexuality. It's usually framed back as its nature versus nurture. So when you look at nature, it's usually biological contributions. They'll look at animal models and say there is same-sex sexual behavior that does occur in nature. I think many religious people would say the fact that something occurs in nature doesn't make it natural in the sense that you mean it. And people will study, regions of the X chromosome and look for differences. Some of those have been shown in some studies, some of them have not. They'll look at prenatal hormonal exposure, even like finger length ratio, and there are some evidences there of differences by sexual orientation. Another popular theory would be birth order effects. So if a mother has like 3 male children, what is the likelihood of one becoming gay? And some lines of research suggest that it increases that likelihood with the more male children. And some studies have shown that, and other studies have not. So these are like active theories, active considerations, all that come from the idea of nature. And then that's often juxtaposed with nurture from the environment in some ways. And I would say the two most popular theories among social conservatives would be it's childhood sexual abuse or it's faulty parent-child relationships. If you do survey adults who are gay or lesbian, they would be more likely to point to childhood sexual abuse in their history. But most people who've experienced the trauma of sexual abuse as a child develop a heterosexual orientation. So to talk about it as a direct causal pathway is oversimplifying a potentially very complicated area of research. Similarly, with parent-child relationships, many people will report faulty relationships, difficult relationships with their parents, most of whom develop a heterosexual orientation. So the conclusion today among most behavioral scientists is that we really don't know what causes homosexual orientation. It's probably best to look at it as there's multiple contributing factors from both nature and nurture. Those contributions are probably weighted differently for different people. When we get to the question of whether sexual orientation can change, it's also a very complex question. I think for some people, they experience both attraction to the same and opposite sex, or they experience same-sex attraction but not as strong as another person who might be kind of wall-to-wall homosexual in their orientation. Can people change by being involved in ministry? I think that's a study that we did over a 7-year span of time, and we found results that really nobody liked. If you believe that orientation cannot change at all, it's an immutable characteristic, our data pushed back against that and suggested that for some people there was change. There was an average change for some people, and averages suggested pretty significant change for some. I don't think that it was very often 180 degrees. I think that would probably be a mistaken way to think about that data. On the other side of the continuum are people who say that orientation can change if you try hard enough or have enough faith. And I think that our study didn't support that position either. Most people did not experience as much change as they had hoped for.
Time for your Thursday Thankful, and today's prayer is this: thank you, Lord, for being the God of a second chance, because you know I would not always get it right. In fact, there are days we get it a lot more wrong than we do get it right, but He is always faithful and His grace is always sufficient. That is indeed a blessing this Thursday. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. This is indeed Thursday. Let's all make it a thankful one.